This is the age of corporations, corporations that control resources, labor, markets, and policies of countries without formally ruling them as colonies. They extract resources, exploit and abuse labor, and influence trade and economy, eventually bankrupting countries. This is Daybreak, and the elephant in the room today is American colonialism and how it is destroying the world, one country at a time. So stay with me. Welcome back to Daybreak, the podcast. We are discussing American colonialism and how it is shaping the US policies today. Let me start by saying that the world is not better off under a hostile corporate takeover than it would be under a military invasion. Because they both extract resources and enslave people, one with shackles or chains and the other with loans, circular debts, and tariffs. In his book, The Anarchy, William Dalrymple mentions that the East India Company was, at its height, the most powerful corporation in the world, with its own private army of around 200,000 men. It was a multinational corporation that ran a country with an army that was larger than armies of many European national armies. Dalrymple's central argument is that the conquest of India was not initially directed by the British state, but by a private corporation driven by shareholder profit, which gradually took over large parts of the subcontinent, something he presents as a warning about unregulated corporate power. So when East India Company conquered Bengal after the Battle of Plassey in the year 1757, it did not govern like a state with civic responsibility. It ruled like a private company with shareholders, dividends, and quarterly profits. It extracted revenues like a business squeezing an asset. The Bengal famine of 1770, which killed millions, happened under the company rule, while tax collection and profit remittances to London were booming. Dalrymple emphasizes something crucial here. The East India Company was not a government pretending to be a business. It was a business forced into becoming a government. Its primary obligation was not public welfare. It was profit. As the empire granted corporations the right to extract, to rule, and to profit. And colonialism was never just flags and crowns. It was balance sheets, logistics, and supply chains, and tariffs. And colonialism did not really disappear. It has always been here, planning its next acquisition, whether it is Greenland or Cuba. The empire faded after the Great Wars, but the corporate power really strengthened after the war. Control shifted from land to resources, labor, debt, and trade rules. Multinational shaped the labor markets, and resource extraction deals started overriding local consent. Modern colonists did not arrive in ships, and they did not establish trading posts. They came in corporate jets, and they built skyscrapers, and they operated from penthouses. They came to liberate people from tyranny, just as they did in Iran in 1979, and in Venezuela recently, and what they are doing to Cuba now, establishing democracy. They install and rule through puppet governments. The key difference today is that the old colonialism meant direct rule, and modern version exercises indirect control. But here is the uncomfortable part. It often operates legally, with consent, on paper, and through institutions that look neutral. So when people say colonialism is over, they actually mean the symbols are gone, but the mechanics still very much alive, just wearing a suit and a tie instead of a uniform. USA today is not being governed like a state. USA today is being ruled like a very large corporation. And when the president says, make America great again, he actually means make America rich. But he's also saying, make the rest of the world poor. And how the US has expanded its military presence and economic control over the world in the name of protection against communism. And it is still expanding its empire, not in size, but in impact and control. It is extracting resources, leaving the countries devastated. US President calls Venezuelan oil his oil, and he's making deals for the oil that he does not own. He renames the Gulf of Mexico, and he's deciding on fate of countries that are sovereign, and some are America's close allies. He wants to rebuild Gaza Strip, but he wants to build it his way, not for the people who live there, but for his developer friends. Not to build housing, but casinos and resorts, just like the empire that built white-only clubs in India. He has blockaded Cuba, and he does not care about humanitarian crisis or the human collateral damage. People are not a constant in his equation. They are replaceable, just like employees of a corporation. He's doing that to his own country, his own people, crushing any and every voice of reason, destroying the culture of education and these centuries-old educational institutions, because education liberates the mind, and a free mind cannot be enslaved again. And the America is not that land of the free anymore. Countries have citizens, and citizens have rights. They have laws, and they have systems, and they have institutions. But the great America is restructuring itself, just like a corporation. And immigrants have now become redundant in the very country they had built, and they just received their 2 weeks' notices. The US does not represent colonialism in the classical sense, but you could reasonably call it corporate or transactional imperialism. Look at the structure. Power framed as deals, not norms. The president treats sovereign states like firms. Winners, losers, leverage, penalties. Alliances become conditional contracts. Sovereignty matters less than the control of cash flow. Corporations have become instruments of state power. Trade wars, tariffs, and sanctions lead to pressure that often benefits specific industries. The state clears the path, the corporations extract the value. Welcome to the world of tariffs, like if it was 1789 again. Disregard of the international law, multinational institutions, environmental and labor standards, trade agreements and protocols. Power balance shifts towards capital over countries when you remove the rules that historically limited corporate overreach. There is no empire, there's no governors, and no annexation, but a clear message that access to markets, security, or stability comes at a price. And US corporate interests sit at the very top. This is not nationalism. It's mercantilism and de facto colonialism with CEOs instead of colonial administrators. The corporate mergers and acquisitions, like talking of taking over Greenland or calling Canada its 51st state. Hostile takeovers like in Venezuela. Intimidating tactics, like calling our Prime Minister Governor Carney, discussing sovereign matters with people who do not have the mandate, crafting unfair and incorrect objections on the free trade agreements as if we were not partners or allies, but competition, accusing neighboring countries of economic and trade abuse, and a complete disregard of United Nations or International Court of Justice, pulling out of who with over $2 billion owed to the United Nations. a classical invalidation of international organizations and institutions and attempting to replace them with a custom-built board of peace. President Trump believes that everything and everyone is for sale, and everything and everyone has a price. Now, we understand corporations do not have feelings or emotions. They're only concerned with the bottom line and the balance sheet and the profit and loss statements. There's no right or wrong or good or bad when you do not follow an international code of ethics. Intimidation is the technique to throw conversations out of balance before sitting on the negotiation table. Firing decoys to divert your attention, raising false flags and smoke screens so you focus on everything else except on what they are going to bring to the table. That is modern corporate warfare. And boardrooms have become new battlegrounds, and they're not taking hostages. The president would argue that this is just America first. And their supporters see it as honesty instead of hypocrisy. But I see it as accelerating a system where corporate power replaces political accountability, eventually ending up in fascism. The U.S. is not reviving colonialism by territory, but they're normalizing a world where power is exercised through corporations, coercive deals, and economic dependency rather than through law or consent. And that, my friends, is American corporate colonialism. And as Prime Minister Carney said, you are either on the table or on the menu. So choose wisely, as it is time to choose. And this is Daybreak time. Thank you.